Okay, so in the third video that we're going to consider, we're going to look at this whole idea that oligopolies here, if they're not going to collude, then they're going to compete. And in this video, we're going to look at price competition, and in the last video, we'll look at non-price. Then we'll also look at game theory as well to give you an overview of that, but I'll be looking at it a little bit in this one as well. So hopefully I'm going to give you some examples here of different types of price wars recently. This is just something that you can find online. You can use AI to find it, but this is an example of the UK supermarkets. They've cut the price of milk in order to, it said, attract the budget conscious shoppers. So milk is a staple part of people's diets, and with the cost of living crisis, obviously, supermarkets have Tesco kicked off a price war, okay, and they reduced the cost of all sizes, so you can buy milk in different sizes. And then it was followed by Sainsbury's, Aldi, Lidl, Asda joining in, all stores charging £1.50, etc., etc. So you know, a typical price war that occurs in an oligopoly market. But I've just added this in, which is I think quite important that you pick up on. This is an investment analyst at a company called AJ Bell, and he said that the price cuts are some light at the end of the inflationary tunnel. So remember that inflation's been quite high, and one of the reasons is that food prices have been going up. But he says, and this is the important thing, it also suggests that the UK fiercely competitive supermarket sector, so it's a competitive sector. This is an oligopoly that has a lot of competition, and he says it isn't simply going to cash in on the profits as the wholesale costs fall. In other words, the costs of producing milk go down, and it could be that the supermarkets keep their prices high. But the reason that he says they're not going to do that is that there's always a competitor waiting in the wings. And this hints at this whole thing with oligopoly, that there's an interdependence. There's always firms, and you've always got to think, well, what are other firms going to be doing? If we don't drop the price, then maybe the other firms are going to drop their prices. So because of the fiercely competitive nature of oligopoly here, they start to have a price war. Price wars are often short-lived, intense periods when competing businesses lower their prices in order to gain, and this is important, market share, cash flow, and revenue. Okay, because really, if you think about it, you're moving away from the profit maximizing position. Okay, and so the profits are likely to be a bit lower in the short run. We'll go through that in a minute. So you've got to be able to talk about extra market share, extra quantity, extra revenue, improving cash flow as they generate that extra revenue. It's suggested they're common in industries where there's relative price stability, and then suddenly you get an aggressive move. In other words, there might be some sort of collusion going on. Maybe it's informal collusion, but then suddenly you're going to have a price war. And game theory can be used to help explain why it might be in the rational self-interest of each business to set lower prices, given that they expect their rivals to do the same. When I first looked at that, I thought, well, that's slightly odd, but what that's saying is that that because there's this sort of fear, rational fear, that everyone is going to start to drop their prices, then it's quite rational for you to be the first mover, and for you as a firm to drop your price, because you're thinking, well, very soon the other firms are going to drop theirs, so let's steal a march on them and get our price cut in first, as it were. So it really does help to explain periods of price stability followed by price wars. Okay, obviously the price wars in petrol, and there's an article here which looks at that. Low-cost airlines, they often have price wars. After Christmas, like currently, you might find a lot of price wars going on. And it says because the consumers are price sensitive, and that's quite important in price wars, that the argument is that the consumers are sensitive to prices, and so if you reduce your price first, then you're going to gain a lot of market share. It's going to be PD elastic, and so you're going to gain a lot of quantity, a lot of revenue, etc., and maybe arguing that your market share goes up. Another example of price wars is discounting cinemas, the funeral industry, the mortgage market. At the moment, if you Google this, the UK mortgage market, they're starting to drop their prices quite quickly for new mortgages, and it's an example of a bit of a slowdown in the housing market, and some of these banks, building societies, want to attract new customers. So as the interest rates have come down, they're passing those on quite quickly to consumers. And online film streaming, that is often subject to a lot of price wars as well. Okay, now how would you show this on a diagram? Well, this is your standard, if you like, colluding oligopoly diagram that we've looked at just in a previous video on collusion, where you set your profit maximizing point, MCMR, you set your price. In order to sell that quantity, the price is up here, there's your average cost, and so you're making a supernormal profit. Now, the one key thing that you've got to realize is that if you drop your price, okay, so from here, you're going to drop your price down here somewhere, you are going to move away from profit maximizing. So we'll look at this in the next diagram, but it's important that you recognize that you, as a company, you may be, certainly in the short run, you may be moving away from the profit maximizing objective that we often assume in our microeconomics. So this is an example here. I've taken out the average cost curve, we don't need it. This is the price here when we are having a profit maximizing point, okay, MCMR, and as soon as we drop a price war, so as soon as we drop our price to say this point here, then we're going to have an extension of demand, we're going to increase demand in the market, and several things are going to happen. So let's have a look at it. The first is you're going to move away from profit maximizing. Worth stressing that in the exam, that you are no longer a profit maximizing firm in the short run, we'll come back to that, but you might be revenue maximizing or sales maximizing at this point. So the firms are dropping the price, extension of demand, and you've increased your output. You've also increased your revenue, because over this range the marginal revenue is positive. So if marginal revenue is positive and you keep producing more and more, you are adding to your revenue. So your revenue keeps going up as soon as you are producing more here. Because the marginal revenue is positive, you're adding to revenue. Okay, you are, as I say before, you're reducing the amount of profit. Okay, because as you've moved from this output to this output, the extra costs have gone up, the extra revenue has also gone up, but the costs have gone up by more than the revenue, and so your profit is starting to dip down a bit. Not losses being made, because we don't know, because we haven't got the average cost curves in there. Sales will rise, so you can say there'll be an increase in the quantity being sold, and therefore your market share will rise as well, is another argument. But you can argue you're getting closer to this point, which is the allocative efficient point. So allocative efficiency is when price reflects the marginal cost, and so this would be allocative efficient point, and by introducing a price war, you are getting closer to that point. Okay, all right. Now this is where game theory comes in, and I'm going to introduce game theory in a small way here, but there will be another video where I'm going to go through a question on game theory. Okay, so what we do is we set out a two-company, two-price model. Okay, this is called a matrix, and we start with both companies charging you £2. Now, at this point, you have revenues in the market. So Sainsbury's, whichever firm is on this side here, is always the first one in the box there. The one that is up here, whatever company you choose there, is on the right-hand side of the box. And just to make it simpler for you, I've made them in those colours. So what this says is if both companies charge £2 for a particular good, then their revenue is going to be 10 million and 10 million pounds as well. So they're both getting the same revenue. In other words, you're saying that they're sort of split the market between them. Now, the argument then is this, that if Tesco assumed that Sainsbury's will not follow, so let's take Tesco, and the assumption is they're not going to follow the price cut. So Tesco will come away from the £2 and they'll cut their price to £1.80, and then what will happen is that their revenue is going to rise to £12 million, whereas Sainsbury's will have a fall in revenue to £7 million. Okay, so you've got to be able to use these figures in the exam and explain this. So it's on the assumption that Sainsbury's keep the price at £2. Okay, but Sainsbury's say, well, wait a minute, we were getting 10 million, we've now got 7 million, so they will also follow suit and cut the price to the £1.80. So we move from box A to box B when Tesco cut the price. So we're now at B, but then Sainsbury's say, wait a minute, we are going to follow suit and we will move to box D, where they both end up with revenues of 9 million. Now, 9 million in your example is smaller than the 10 million, and the reason being that the assumption is that you've gone back to, splitting the market between yourselves, but at a lower price, and so your revenue is going to be lower. So the revenue falls to 9 million as they're both now selling for £1.80, and make the assumption, if you like, explain this in your analysis, that that fall in the price hasn't really increased the quantity being sold overall very much. This may be a staple product like, say, milk. Okay, both see a fall in revenue, and so therefore they want to raise the price again, and they do that by either colluding formally, if you like, or just informally, just thinking to themselves, well, this was daft, wasn't it? It didn't really work, and so we'll put the price back up again. So you move from A to B when Tesco cut the price, Sainsbury's follow, you move to box D, and then they move back up to raise the price again. So the argument is that the price war, cutting the price, doesn't work in the long run, and so they move back to the higher price in the end. But there's always an incentive for firms here to keep, if we were starting at A, there's always an incentive for firms, either Tesco here or Sainsbury's here, to cut the price in the hope that the others don't follow. But the result is prices tend to stay stable up at box A long periods of time, then price wars, and then back to higher, more stable prices. And that's something that economists observe when they look at oligopolistic markets. So if you're ever asked to use a game theory, an example like that would actually be the one that I would suggest that you use. Okay, all right. Now, predatory pricing is one of the things that we've got to look at, and predatory pricing occurs when a firm will price below cost. But the key thing here with predatory pricing is, because if you think about it, when you're cutting your price below your cost, then you're making losses, so you have to say it's with the purpose of driving the other firms out of the market, who then prices can then be raised again, but, and this is the key thing, the firm is able to steal some of the consumers left behind by the firm that left. So predatory pricing, which is illegal, is an example of reducing your price below cost, and we'll see what that means in a minute, but in order to drive another firm out of the market and therefore make the industry less competitive. And that's the key thing that you've got to say in the exam. Okay, so because otherwise if they just reduced your price below cost and then raised it again, it doesn't really make much sense. So in the long run the firm makes more profit because they've reduced the price, other firms have left the market, then they can raise their prices again, and they raise their prices and end up with higher quantities than they started with. Okay, so that's the key thing that you've got to say with predatory pricing. So I'm going to give you this diagram. It's a possibly overcomplicated diagram, but I'm going to bring it in anyway. This is your profit maximizing price up here. So MCMR, up here, sell the goods by pricing at P-max. Now, when it says that predatory pricing is below cost, there's a question: is it below the average total cost or the variable cost? So you can say either, to be honest. There's no definite idea behind this, but this one here is, instead of pricing here at this P-max, this is the average total cost on this black curve here, and so they reduce the price below that average total cost, so they are making a loss. And if this was just a long run situation, they would shut down. Okay, some people use a diagram where they reduce the price below not just the total cost but the variable cost. And so you've got to remember the shutdown conditions is that in the short run, if you're covering your variable costs, so this price here in the short run, it wouldn't be causing shutdown, but this one would be causing shutdown because you're not matching your variable costs in the short run. And so this one, P2, you shut down in the short run. P1, you don't shut down in the short run, but you do shut down in the long run. So if you just wanted to ignore the short and the long run, you just would use this P1 example here. So hopefully that makes sense. So reduction in price below the variable cost will definitely cause in the short run there to be shut down. Okay, limit pricing is the last one that we look at here, and this is where there's either, you can use both, there's either a threat of a new entrant coming into your market, or there may be some smaller inefficient firms in the market as well. That's another way that you can use limit pricing. So what you've got to sort of assume is that if you've got a new entrant, they're going to be smaller than the existing firms. And so they have to just take the price from the existing firms, but because their output is going to be quite small, they're producing an output level on a higher part of the ATC curve. We'll see this in a diagram in a minute. Or if they're inefficient firms, they're producing at a higher ATC. So basically you're saying a limit pricing is when either there's a new firm threatening to come in, or has just come in, or there's inefficient firms. And what limit pricing does is it reduces the price below the average total cost for that new or inefficient firm, okay, but the existing firm is still going to make a profit. So you reduce your price to below the average cost of the new firm or the inefficient firm, but it's above the average cost of the existing firm. So it's different from predatory because the existing firm still makes a profit, whereas in predatory pricing the existing firm made a loss. Okay, so the limit price is the highest price that you could charge without attracting new firms into the industry. So let's have a look at a diagram. So we tend not to, it's much better not to put in your marginals and your marginal revenue and marginal cost here. Just draw a nice average revenue curve, nice average total cost curve, and where the gap between them is the biggest, that's going to be your profit maximizing point. So the assumption is that OQ star is profit maximizing output and OP1 is the price that they're going to charge. Okay, now let's say there's a potential new firm which can only produce less than the existing output, or you could use this, as I say, for an inefficient smaller firm in the industry, but then this firm is smaller than this firm. So this firm here has to accept the price of the bigger firm, and what we'll see is if they keep the price at P1, the existing firm, that the new firm is attracted in because they can make a bit of profit. So we identify the gap between the price in the market and the average cost of the new firm, and we call that A, and it's the profit of the new firm if the existing firm, this one that is producing OQ star, kept the price at this profit maximizing point. Okay, so what you do is you limit the price. So you bring your price down here, and we call this the limit price, OP2. This price here, okay, is limiting the amount of profit that the firm is going to achieve, okay, but it's still going to be above the average cost of the existing firm, but below the average cost of the new firm. That's where that line has got to go. So we then identify this gap here, part B. B is the new firm, this new firm that's coming in. Instead of allowing them to have this high price up here, we're saying the price they have to take in the market is down here, so they're making a loss. The average revenue is below the average total cost for that new firm. Okay, but see, this gap here is showing you the existing firm, this existing firm is still making a profit. It's not maximizing its profit, it's only making a small amount of profit here. This is the per unit profit on this production here by limiting the price to this level. Now, you know, if you wanted to, but I think it complicates the diagram, you could identify the smaller amount of profit being here rather than the old profit, which is up here. You've got to make sure that you don't overcomplicate this diagram by, when you drop your price here, saying, oh, there'll be an extension of demand. So don't do that. Just say they're producing at OQ star and they limit their price, but the key is they're still making a profit, whereas in predatory pricing they didn't make a profit. So let's summarize price wars. They reduce the price, so there's going to be less profit. You're moving away from profit maximizing, but there would be higher sales, revenue, because PD is elastic, and higher market share. In the short run, okay, that is going to happen. But then you can use that idea of game theory to explain that in the long run, competitors might follow suit, and so you don't have a price war. In the long run, you start to collude. It is illegal, and so you've got all that threat of being found out and fined. With predatory pricing, the firm that starts the price reduction or the war will make losses in the short run, but with the hope of longer run profits. Remember, you've got to say that. You've got to say price goes back up, and therefore they get the higher price with a higher quantity now, because some firms have left the industry. Limit pricing, the firm that drops the price does not make losses, it just lowers its profits. So that's really quite important that you distinguish, if you can, between those two types of pricing. Okay, so overall we're just going to have a look here. This is a diagram. If you want to take a snapshot of that, you can. Okay, what we're saying is that in price wars, in the short run, prices are reduced. When others follow, profits fall again. But as I say, you've got to say the price goes back up to the original, and then maybe they collude. Okay, this is just showing you, hopefully, the advantages and drawbacks of price wars, but by now this should be obvious. You should be able to do this by looking at the effect on the firm. Price is lower, increased output, market share, revenue. Does depend on XCD, higher investment if they've made more profit. You know, some firms leave so they get more monopoly power. Consumers may not switch. They just get used to price wars is one of the problems. In the long run, that maybe price wars, firms realise, are costing them money, and so they go into non-price competition. And to get the price war, to reduce the price, they can cut the quality of the good, but in the long run, again, as I say, they might collude. From the consumer's point of view, the lower prices, price wars are very helpful. Lower prices increase your consumer surplus here. Standard of living, especially if it's an item like food, or say milk, petrol, those sorts of things. But remember, cost cutting might reduce the quality, and also, as I've said just now, you can get used to, consumers get used to this idea of fighting over prices, and so there can be some inertia. You think, well, I'm not going to change because the firm that I usually use, if I always go to Sainsbury's, for example, they're going to cut their prices quite soon as well. Well, you could extend it a little bit by looking at the workers, health and safety. Because of the lower prices, you can argue that the firms might cut health and safety, cut wages, that sort of thing. But if they get higher profits in the short run, then or higher revenue, they might raise their wages, but they may cut them in the long run, and some jobs might get lost. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how to analyze and evaluate competing oligopolies, competing on price. And in the next video, we're going to look at competing on the non-price factors.